Story 1. Back in the 1980s, I lived in a flat in southeast London. The flat was located in a small tower block 10 stories high, with 4 flats per floor, one per corner as it were. The flat overlooked a local park and afforded very nice views of the area. The neighbors were generally very amenable, but everybody tended to keep to themselves, so no one had any problems with anyone. That all changed when a new family moved into a flat down on the second floor on the same corner of the building where we lived. We lived on the 8th. They were not the most gracious of individuals, frequently leaving rubbish bags strewn around their floor's lobby for days rather than depositing them in the communal bins, and parking their cars in other residents' allocated parking spots. In other words, they were the epitome of the appellation chav. Complaints to the local council invariably fell on deaf ears. They soon developed a reputation for hosting loud drunken parties on the weekends, which tended to go past midnight. This was pretty annoying for us and the other residents, but we were somewhat less affected due to the distance between our respective flats. One particular Friday evening, however, proved to be the straw that broke the camel's back. At around 10 p.m., we heard the music start up, but it now appeared that the host had recently purchased a new sound system because the bass was now intolerably loud. I can only surmise that a peculiarity of the building's design, coupled with what sounded like much larger bass speakers, appeared to magnify the effect in our bedroom to the point where it made it quite impossible to sleep. At about 11:30 p.m., I trotted downstairs and knocked on their door. It was flung open by what I could only assume to have been the male resident. Looking somewhat the worse for wear, I politely asked him if he'd mind turning the music down as it was very loud, rattling the furniture in my flat and making it difficult to sleep. Get lost, door slams. Charming, I thought. So, I went back upstairs and called the non-emergency police number and explained the situation. They assured me that someone would be around in due course. Being a Friday night, I reckon it might take an hour or two. So, with much wailing and gnashing of teeth, we sat there waiting for the police to arrive. Sure enough, about an hour later, I saw a patrol car pull up and a couple of London's finest enter our building. A few moments later, the music gets turned down and the police leave. No sooner had the car disappeared up the street than the music went back up to its previous level. We endured it for another half hour, no change. So once again I called the police. This time it takes closer to 2 hours for them to turn up. Yep, definitely a busy Friday night. They finally arrive around 3 a.m., and once again the music is reduced to a sensible level. Unfortunately, shortly after they depart, back up goes the volume to its previous furniture-shaking intensity. As you might imagine, by now I was royally angry. My spouse, too, someone not normally prone to displays of anger, was positively foaming at the mouth and looked like they were single-handedly going to reenact the Battle of Austerlitz in glorious technicolor, together with full orchestral accompaniment. It was then that I had a dazzling idea, one so fiendishly cunning and yet devilishly simple: a guaranteed cast iron, 100% pure, 24-karat stonker of an idea so brilliant that I felt certain that within a few minutes, I could stop this once and for all and execute my plan in such a way as to make it impossible to trace back to me. Cue maniacal cackling while twirling an imaginary mustache. Grabbing my toolkit, I crept down the stairwell to the second floor, just to double-check the actual flat number. Having confirmed the number, I went back up to the 4th floor. In the stairwell just next to the exit door to the 4th floor lobby was a wooden access door that concealed one of the 2 electrical distribution panels for the entire building. The door was only secured by a simple square key fitting, and the application of a large flat blade screwdriver would pop the latch with no problem. Thus, I opened the door to reveal the distribution panel itself. Pulling the cover open, I was presented with a large panel containing 20 large 80-amp fuses, one each for the lower set of flats. Each one was neatly labeled with the flat's number, and it took but a moment to locate the appropriate one. Now, by one of those happy coincidences that usually only occur in the more egregious examples of the Hollywood B-movie, I just happened to have in my toolkit a dead fuse of exactly the same type and capacity. A few weeks previously, I'd had to replace a similar fuse in the theater where I worked, and I'd absent-mindedly tossed the dead fuse in my toolbox where I'd promptly forgotten about it until now. Now, with all my ducks in a neat row, I pulled the fuse carrier for the miscreants flat out. Instant. Blessed. Silence. I rapidly swapped the live fuse for the dead one and reinserted the carrier. Securing everything back up again, I casually strolled back upstairs to enjoy a few hours in the hallowed arms of Morpheus. Addendum. Some weeks later, the troublesome family was moved out of their flat. It transpired that the local council had received so many noise complaints over the previous 6 months that they were obliged to rehouse them elsewhere. Story 2. Years ago, when I was attending Naval Nuclear Power School in Orlando, my best friend and I were involved in an incident at the Navy Exchange on base. It was payday, so after class, my friend and I headed over to the exchange to cash our checks and pick up a few things. The exchange was part of a cluster of shops with a covered area connecting them. With the blazing Florida sun that day, there was quite a crowd gathered in the shaded area. As we were headed for the door of the exchange, we saw a well-dressed late middle-aged woman carrying a large number of packages trying to get through the door. Why she didn't have a cart for all of her packages, I have no clue. My friend and I each grabbed one side of the double doors and opened them up for her. Just as she was coming through the door, a lieutenant junior grade comes charging through, nearly knocking her off her feet and sending her packages flying. The lieutenant joins a cluster of other junior officers having a casual conversation. I caught the woman's arm to steady her, and once she regained her balance, I ran to get a shopping cart while my friend started gathering up her packages. When I returned a moment later, we put all of her packages in the cart and presented it to the woman. She gave us a huge smile and thanked us. My friend, being a bit of a smart mouth, saw that the offending lieutenant was still chatting with his buddies. He pitched his voice loud enough to ensure the lieutenant would hear and said, "Our pleasure, ma'am. Some of us don't require an act of Congress to be gentlemen." Even though I was laughing at this verbal barb, alarm bells were sounding in my head. Sure enough, the lieutenant had indeed heard and was striding our way, red-faced and breathing fire. My friend and I popped to attention, and he proceeded to scold us thoroughly. I must admit, his command of profanity was impressive. And coming from a sailor, that's saying something. During this tirade, I noticed that the lady we assisted had pushed her cart over to another small group of officers, talking to them and pointing in our direction. One of the officers detached himself from the group and came striding over. I swear, I had never seen as many scrambled eggs gold braid on a hat in my life. And his shoulder boards had 2 stars. It was the base commanding officer. Oh my goodness, we're done for now. My friend and I were starting to reach for our IDs and getting ready to be put on report. He looked at us and said, "Gentlemen, thank you for assisting my wife. You may go now." We snapped out salutes and a brisk, "Yes, sir," and beat feet into the exchange. We looked back through the glass wall to see the lieutenant standing at a very rigid attention, while the admiral reduced him to a quivering puddle. I don't know what happened after that, but it's likely that he had very limited advancement potential and wasn't very happy with the choices of duty stations he had available to him. Story 3. Background. The subject of this story is my mother. I'll call her Amber. She's in her late 70s and works for a women's clothing store that caters specifically to older clientele. She's been working for this particular company for some 20 years now. The manager of the store is the absolute epitome of a Karen, so let's call her Karen. Extremely entitled, short-haired, chubby, cheats on her husband, and a blatant backstabber. Because the store is staffed by mostly older women, cliques tend to form. It's basically high school. Yes, older women can be that petty, and naturally, Karen has her own cronies. During periods where no one is in the store, there also tends to be a ton of gossip important for later. The assistant manager, let's call her Jackie, is also one of Karen's lackeys, and she's such a suck-up to Karen. If Karen does something, then Jackie isn't far behind, etc. Amber is a bit of a ball buster, and she has zero tolerance for garbage in her personal life. Over the years, she has tried to stay impartial when it comes to her work, however, because to her it's all about professionalism. She also has empathy, which is something that seems to be in short supply with these other women. It also helps that she has been the top seller for her district for some 10 years running despite working part-time. Karen and Jackie absolutely hate her for it. So much so that Karen routinely schedules her for hours that are not especially good. Despite this though, Amber still has her loyal clientele, and she always comes out on top against the other sales associates in total sales almost every quarter. As expected, this naturally feeds the horrible feedback loop with Karen and Jackie. When COVID-19 hit, the company decided to cut all commissions for sales associates. The commission was one of the main reasons why Amber endured Karen and Jackie's nonsense. While she only made slightly above the state's minimum wage, with the commission, she could double or even triple that amount on good days. According to her, no other retailer in the area offers this kind of system, and it's pretty unlikely that the company will reinstate it even after COVID-19 ends. Along with the cut in wages, the store was also forced to decrease the number of hours that they could offer to their associates. Karen took this as a way to essentially bar Amber from working at the store. While other associates were getting 8-10 hours a week, Amber would see maybe 6 if she was lucky, and they would be during times of low customer traffic. Karen could get away with this because the district manager is also in her pocket. Along with the reduced hours and the removal of commissions, the store naturally had a mandatory mask policy for all employees and customers. Karen and her lackeys would often whine and complain about how unnecessary this was because, according to them, COVID-19 is a hoax, and wearing masks makes you subservient to the government. There were a few incidents where Karen would let people without masks into the store despite the state and company mandates. Amber refused to rock the boat, however, so when this would happen, she would go into the back of the store and stay as far away from these people as possible. During this period in time, a friend of the family and a good friend of Amber's passed away due to complications from COVID-19. The funeral was set for a time when Amber was scheduled to work, so she called out that day. Karen and Jackie attacked Amber and the deceased, claiming that she must have caught the flu or been in bad health, and that Amber was feeding into the lie. Not long after, a few of the store's loyal clients also passed away from COVID-19. And still, Karen and Jackie, along with their groupies, maintained their narrative in the most vindictive way possible. Every time someone died, it must have been because of bad life choices or bad health. Never was it attributed to the global pandemic that was claiming thousands of people a day, according to Karen and her groupies. Recently, the COVID-19 restrictions have started to lift, and many of the clientele and employees have gotten their vaccines. This includes submitting paperwork to show that they have indeed obtained a vaccine or a note from a doctor explaining why they couldn't have won. Not Karen nor Jackie, though. To them, getting the vaccine would be like pumping poison into their veins. Instead, they decided to use fake COVID-19 vaccination cards with their information, effectively forging the documents. Amber, however, has suggested multiple times that they just get the vaccines because it is something that is mandated by the company. All employees must get vaccines when they are available, and given that almost all of the employees are above the age of 60, they have been eligible for the shots for months now. Recently, Amber had an emotional conversation directly with Karen where she expressed her concern for her. "I just want you and your family to be safe, so please get the vaccine." Karen responded with her normal snide attitude, of course. A few days later, however, Karen sent a text message mentioning that she had finally gotten the vaccine she didn't. Amber replied that it was great and that she was happy for her. Karen just replied with a gif of some guy flipping the bird. This was the beginning of the end for Amber. The incident. During one of her shifts, Amber overheard Karen and Jackie discussing how Amber was a jerk and a sheep who bought the story about how Karen had taken the vaccine. During that same shift, Amber was working with a customer in the back, and some woman came into the store and stole a couple of items of clothing, probably totaling out to be $100 at most. Now, it's company policy that during all shifts, there always be at least 2 employees in the store. And during this particular stretch of time, Jackie was the only other person in the store. According to the video cameras, Jackie was up in the front of the store playing with her phone when this woman came in. Normally, if someone steals items from the store, the protocol is to avoid confronting them and instead just call security after they've left the store. This is mainly to avoid lawsuits and to protect the employees should these people choose to get violent. It has happened in the past. That evening, Amber received a call from Karen telling her that she was on probation pending an investigation for allowing this woman to steal from the store. Given the company's policy regarding theft, this really made no sense. It was at this point that Amber truly decided she had had enough. Eventually, this probation led to Amber's dismissal, and the official reasoning was fairly vague. The revenge. One thing that I forgot to mention. A few years ago, Amber asked me to teach her how to record things on her phone, and luckily, we live in a single consent state. As such, Amber had recordings of these women backstabbing her and gossiping about rather scandalous things dating back for years. She had gathered quite the collection because you never know when you need to cover yourself. Over the years, Amber has gone to HR to no real avail even with her recordings. Whether it be because they are also in the pocket of Karen, or that they just don't care remains to be seen. The HR department works directly under the district manager. Amber is also very good at keeping any paperwork and proof of these visits, including some recordings. She also recorded the call where she was fired. Amber has a ton of very loyal clients who were pretty distraught when they learned of her dismissal. One client, in particular, runs a column at one of the major newspapers for the nearby city. We will call her Casey. Since Amber was a part-time worker, she didn't really have much of a leg to stand on legally when it came to claiming a wrongful dismissal by legal means. However, that didn't mean that she didn't have any kind of recourse. She decided to attack the problem from multiple fronts. Amber compiled some of the greatest hits from her recording collection and had me email them off to the corporate offices of the company. Specifically, the CEO, CTO, and basically every member of the board of directors. I fired a couple of bursts off to anyone who had any power that I could find. Along with those recordings, she wrote an email about how Karen, Jackie, and their group of followers all refused to get vaccines and had falsified their vaccination documents to pass the company standards. Casey then put Amber in touch with a columnist for the newspaper, and they got copies of the recordings, the text messages, and the dismissal phone call. They also did an interview, which was for an article and a TV slot on the local news. Amber discussed the commission cuts, clear favoritism, lack of any intervention by HR, forged documents, company policy, the incident, etc. Basically anything relevant to paint these women in a terrible light. Among some of these recordings were bits of gossip that included conversations regarding Karen's various cheating incidents over the years she was married, and Amber also wrote an anonymous email to the husband that included some of these recordings. The fallout. The trouble started pretty fast, as you can probably imagine. Karen, Jackie, the district manager, and a couple of their groupies were immediately fired and put under investigation for forging documents. While forging a vaccination card isn't really something too serious, it could lead to some pretty hefty fines. There is no specific law against forging the vaccination cards, however, because the cards contain the government seal. Well, you can just imagine how illegal that might be. Let's just say the FBI has stepped in on this one. One of the recordings featured Karen admitting to using forged cards. After the article and TV slot ran on the local news, the CEO reached out to Amber to formally apologize for the behavior of HR, the district manager, Karen, and Jackie. She even went so far as to offer Amber a raise, but Amber declined because she found a job that actually paid a fair wage and let her work on her own time. The real issue for the CEO and the board was the fact that their employees were breaking company policy for a store that exclusively catered to older women regarding a virus that tends to affect older people. They caught some heavy public backlash for this. Karen's husband seems to have separated from her after finding out about her infidelity. Whether or not this will lead to a divorce remains to be seen. The best part for Amber is that many of her clients started coming to her new store. And again, she's excelling as one of the best sales associates.